Hi, this is Scott Fresener, developer of T-Seps and FastFilms. I'd like to talk to you in this video about errors you might get when you're running routines. The program is very clean. That means if you get errors 999 times out of 1,000, it's a problem with the file. And it's easy to take a customer's file and just run Seps on it, or to maybe create a file and just forget about some of the very basics of what the file needs to be like in T-Seps. As an example, let's run a quick routine on a file that's designed for a black shirt only. I'm going to run simulated 5-color plus 2 whites. And I'll load the same file twice because this design is only going on black shirts. And the program cooks and runs, and I get an error. And I say, well, gee, maybe that's kind of odd, so I say OK, and I get errors after errors. And I'll run the file again. I'll load the second version, and I continue to get errors, and I stop it. Now, typically what happens at this point is you pick up the phone or you email that the file isn't running correctly. And typically I pick up the phone and I say, did you check the file and see if it's in RGB mode? And I ask you to open the file up and you go to Image, Mode, and you notice it's in CMYK. The file must be in RGB color. Must be, must be, must be. So you must always open up both versions of the artwork. Sometimes you'll be playing with a file that's maybe the black masked version, and you'll do some adjustments, and for whatever reason, maybe you convert to CMYK accidentally, or it came in that way, and you must open up the white version also. So the file must be in RGB mode to run correctly. And so you need to always check your file. So before you assume that there's problems with the program, it is typically a problem with the file. So the file must be in RGB mode. And along the same lines is I get email requests, support requests that typically will say, I got an error and I said okay, then I got another error, and then another error, and another error. And the problem is that all we care about is the first error. The first error tells you there's something wrong with the file, and of course the program is going to continue to error out so that people panic and think they got a dozen errors. They got one error, and the one error caused all the other errors. So don't panic when you get lots of errors. It's the first error that we care about. And so again, make sure the file is RGB mode. Another common mistake is to run a routine that's already started to run and maybe was stopped by accident, or maybe you were not happy with the file you were loading. As an example, if I click on Run Simulated 5-color plus 2 whites, and I click on Continue, 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 and I load a file. Let's just load the Atlanta file again. And maybe I think, oh, that was the wrong file. I cancel it out, and I stop it. Now, what happens is a button turns red. If a button is red, you cannot start and run it again. It has to be reset. Now, there are some routines that are the special effects routines that tell you to do something, stop a routine, adjust a file, and then click on the button again. But for all the separation routines, you cannot start in the middle. This button turning red means that we're in the middle of a routine and we can't start again. Now, any other button resets a button, or there's a button called Reset Menus. Click on that. Now the button isn't red. So if you click on the button when it's turned red and try and pick up a routine in the middle, you'll get errors. So the button must always be the color and not in red. Another item that will cause errors is having a file that is not flattened and it doesn't say background in the layers palette. Let's not open the file. Let's just see what happens if I run a routine on a file that I happen to know is in layers still. So we'll load this leopard file. And it's running. Looks good. Oh, error. Let's see. Merge, don't merge. What do we do? Do we cancel? Let's say merge. And we'll run it again. Leopard. This is for a black shirt only. Now, what happens is, after the routine runs, again, you pick up the phone and call me and tell me there's nothing in the channels. There's nothing there. And you just can't figure out why. And usually on the phone, I'll bet you $1,000 that there's layers, and of course you'll swear that there's no layers, or that you'll find out that maybe the black version has no layers and the white version hasn't been flattened. Let's just check this file out. This file's in layers. This file must be, I'll move this over so we can see it, must be flattened, and it has to say background. It can't say layer 1. Like, we could remove and delete the white background. We could remove the wording. We could merge these two layers together. I'm just showing you how you might create the file. Merge visible. delete the background, and now we have what looks like one layer. And so we run the routine. This file is not flattened. It must say background. If we go to the little arrow here, the word flatten image is still available. And so it shows you the file is not flattened. If I click on flatten image, that file is flattened. It must say background. So make sure and check both of your files before you run routines. If you get separations with nothing in some of the channels or nothing in any of the channels when you're done separating like this, it means the file wasn't flattened. Another problem you can run into, especially when you first install the routine or if you move the program to a different computer or do any kind of upgrading, is that T-Seps can't find the actual action. And what happens is you'll run a routine, and we'll just run one real quick. Let's click on Run Simulated 5-Color plus 2 Whites. And it says Command FastFilms is not currently available. Now, T-Seps uses the FastFilms separation engine, and it's saying it can't find the plugin. And if you say continue, of course, you can continue on. It will give you errors, and this is, again, where you might call and say you're getting lots of errors. No, you're getting really one error. The one error was it can't find the plugin. And so the problem is the plugin is not installed correctly, and it could be that you did the normal installer, but maybe you've got multiple versions of Photoshop on your computer, and the install routine possibly didn't find the proper folders. Now, if you recall from the installation video, the plugins must reside in a folder called Automate. And if you can see on my computer, I went to the Program Files folder and found the Adobe folder, and I do have two versions of Photoshop on this computer. One is Photoshop CS2, one is Photoshop CS3. If I double-click on CS3, I find a folder called Plugins and a folder called Automate. And in that folder must be two files. One is called Custom Index and one is called T-Seps. And we see that the file T-Seps is not in here. Now, I'm going to put the file in here, but before I do that, let's go back and I'll show you that there's a difference between Photoshop CS2 and CS3 and CS4. In Photoshop CS2, there's one more folder. You go to Plugins. There's a folder called Adobe Photoshop Only and one called Adobe Image Ready Only. We must click on the Adobe Photoshop Only folder, then the Automate folder, and then you're looking for, again, custom indexed and a file called T-Seps. In fact, right now T-Seps is here. I could copy and paste it from this folder. And if you recall from the installation video, T-Seps makes a folder on your hard disk called T-Seps, and in that folder is a folder called Actions. And in that folder are copies of the plugin, and it copies these to the appropriate Automate folder, but it also puts them on your hard disk so you can find them if you need. And you would basically click on the plugin, right mouse click, do a copy, and then we'll find again the Photoshop CS3 Automate folder. And once we're there, we'll do a right mouse click and paste. And now T-Seps is there. Now keep in mind that if Photoshop is open at this point, you must close Photoshop and reopen it because Photoshop loads these plugins when you open it. And if I copy the plugin right there right now, if Photoshop's open, it still doesn't know the plugin is there. So the plugins must be in the Automate folder, and that's a common problem or error when you're first installing the program or when you're moving the program around from computer to computer or you're upgrading different versions of Photoshop. Make sure and check the Automate folder. Another problem can happen when you first install the program. If you recall from the installation video, when you first install it, the program may come up in the non-button mode, meaning it looks like this. And if you're new and you haven't read the manual and you're anxious to get going, you might start checking things, turning things on or off. You never know, clicking on things, and you're actually screwing around with the program. The program must be in button mode, and button mode is clicking on the little horizontal arrow and click on button mode. Now, if you get errors and if the previous suggestions don't help it, just simply reload the program. You may have turned something off when you were in non-button mode and you didn't know it. Photoshop loads T-Seps into its own memory, so T-Seps still sits on your hard disk in the T-Seps folder and hasn't been touched because Photoshop simply takes that and copies it into its own memory. We can always replace, which refreshes T-Seps by going to the little arrow right here, come down to Replace Action, find the Actions folder, and load the action again, and that refreshes the action in the Actions palette. Another thing that can happen is that you run a routine on a file you've already run a routine on. Sometimes you'll start running a routine and maybe you'll realize you loaded the wrong file and you'll close it out or stop it and you'll forget and accidentally save the file, and you may have saved it with additional channels there from the previous attempt to run a routine. Or you simply run a routine and have all the new channels there and you save the file without renaming it, and later on you want to run a routine again on it and you forget you've already run it. Let's just see what happens if I do that on a file that's already been separated. You can see, by the way, as this is running, there were already channels there. And the program will allow you to load the file twice, and it will continue through the routine. But when it's done, you'll have the original Seps plus new Seps. You'll have a lot of stuff here, and it doesn't take long to realize, in fact, you may get errors, that you've done something wrong because you have two shirt colors, two underbases. This underbase has nothing in it. You have too much stuff. And so it's very simple, and you see that the error of your ways. But this can happen, so just make sure your files are RGB with no layers and have no additional channels, and you'll have fun running T-Seps.